you've had anything to do with a smart trainer and you do some cycling, indoor training, whatever it might be, you've probably come across the term ERG mode. That's what we're going to talk about here. Pros, cons, everything in between when it comes to this feature on our smart trainers, because let's be honest, it can be a little bit polarizing with those who love to use it, those who hate to use it, and there's no real in between. So that's what we're going to talk about here in this Coffee Thoughts, is everything that I'm thinking about when it comes to using ERG mode for training, preparation, whatever it might be. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. All right, welcome back to another Coffee Thoughts, where we sit down, we grab a coffee and just discuss a topic when it comes to sports science, training and preparation. Nothing's right or wrong. It's not a recommendation to do or not to do. These are just my thoughts about a particular topic, and hopefully it opens up a discussion, and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think, first and foremost, about ERG mode? Do you love to use it? Do you hate to use it? Interested to hear what you've got to say down below. But when it comes to ERG mode, realistically, what is ERG mode is the first thing we have to discuss. And ultimately, ERG mode is just transitioning your indoor trainer setup into what we call an ergometer. Basically, an ergometer essentially is what we use all the time in the lab. All ergometers do, like I said, is allow us to control the intensity. Like, we might tell it to sit at 150 watts. And what it does is it just manipulates our variables to get us back in there. Way back in the day, you used to have to set the exact resistance. So we used to measure it in things like kilopons. Set the resistance, you'd have to pedal a particular cadence, do the maths, cadence multiplied by unit of resistance gives us an overall wattage. So that's how we would come to 150 or 120, 210 watts, whatever it might be. Now, with the more automated systems, it's more of a case of we set the wattage, so we set the end output, and then based on what your cadence is doing, the resistance is going to adjust. And that's how your kicker or your smart trainer works in ERG mode, is that it's dictated by the resistance is dictated by your cadence. So let's say I wanted to keep the math simple, I wanted to get 100 watts of intensity. Let's say we're doing a recovery spin or a bit of a warm up. I want 100 watts. There's a couple of options. I could spin at a cadence of 100 RPM, multiply that by 1 unit of resistance, depending on the scale. Let's just keep it simple. Let's say it was 1 kilopond, or 1 unit of resistance is an easier one for those unfamiliar with the units. But 1 multiplied by 100 equals 100 watts. I'm still going to get 100 watts of power if I pedal at a cadence of 50. What it means though, is because I've reduced my cadence, so I'm pedaling slower, I have to produce more force and overcome more resistance to be able to get the same power output, the same overall exertion. So that means I get 2 units resistance, because 2 multiplied by 50 gives me 100. You can play around with the maths as much as you like to create whatever you want. The ERG mode settings in these smart trainers just reverse engineers it, so you don't have to calculate in your head. If I set it 300, I can pedal at my cadence of 90, and it's going to map out that resistance for me. If I increase or decrease my cadence, it constantly adjusts. Where it falls down a little bit is that the adjustment's not instant. If anyone who's played around with ERG mode knows, it doesn't happen straight away. If you drop your cadence for a significant amount, even for a small moment, it smashes you with resistance. And that's probably one of the cons, realistically, is that it's not instantaneous. It's a little bit of lag time. So if you drop your cadence momentarily or whatever it might be, and then you try and bring it back up, you really have to get over it. So obviously some of the cons are, it is a bit dictated by your cadence. But I also look at that and be a pro, because if we're looking at, say, a high intensity interval session, where our primary objectives of that session is we want a high power output, or a particular power output to achieve a physiological stimulus, that be trying to increase the ability to produce power in the first place. So part of that's a muscular adaptation, that more sort of peripheral adaptation. There's so many different things that we could be looking at there. I think ERG mode can be really useful in that space, because if we're looking at being able to produce more force through the pedals in particular, and we want to get better at really sort of punching out that power, what ERG mode allows us to do is sit on a particular intensity. We can define that intensity. We can sit at our most optimal cadence for that intensity, because if you're naturally a higher spinner, like our optimal cadence, in terms of all the research, you look at any study, optimal cadence in cycling economy is your preferred cadence. Your body is fantastic at working out what the perfect cadence is for you for that power output. So let's say we're trying to hit 300 watts in our effort. Your optimal cadence, let's say, might be, I'm just saying might be because it's going to be different for everyone, might be, say, 90 or 95 RPM. Maybe it's a little bit higher, a little bit lower, it doesn't matter. But you can then spin at that, and that's going to be the optimal combination. It's going to provide the appropriate resistance. You're not then just playing around with gear ratios to work it out. Like, fantastic for beginners, but also fantastic on isolating what is the outcome of the session we're looking for. Do we want that muscular stimulus? I want you to sit on 300. I'm not worried about what your cadence is today. I'm not worried about anything else. I'm just worried about you producing the power, increasing the ability to produce force through the pedals. But on the flip side, a lot of the argument then comes around and says, well, that's just being lazy. We're not learning to produce the power by ourselves. I don't tend to agree with that point. I can understand where that logic comes from. Yes, there is a lot of work that the bike is doing for us, so to speak. But you still have to do the work. Like, you still have to produce the cadence appropriate for you to actually be able to power it. What we're eliminating is, I guess, that component of it. We're eliminating going through and just constantly thinking about trying to optimize exact gear ratio to produce power. It's like, there are circumstances where we don't want to optimize that. There are circumstances where I want to smash your legs on the trainer because I want to try and generate a bit more peripheral adaptation. So I want maybe the resistance to be a bit higher because you're struggling to maintain cadence as you fatigue, etc. There are circumstances where that is an absolutely appropriate adaptation and absolutely worthwhile. There's obviously circumstances where it isn't. Like, sometimes I don't want to do that. Sometimes I want to go for a cardiovascular adaptation more so, in which case I might want to increase cadence, have a slightly lighter resistance. That might be able to be done in erg mode if you spin your cadence up higher and you're disciplined enough. Or it might be, let's not go in erg mode and let's more work on cadence because we're not as concerned about if power drops as we fatigue, etc. Like, it's just really coming down to, what are you trying to achieve in that session? Are you trying to sustain a really consistent power output? Erg mode's fantastic for that. It takes out so much of the variability and guessing. There's other circumstances where you want to not be in erg mode because you might want a bit more variability. And I don't use erg mode all the time. I use it very specifically. I use it for testing because I want consistency, and I use it for certain high intensity outputs. I don't use it at all, and I do not recommend it at all for people going out and doing a zone 2 ride. If you have to do your zone 2 ride indoors on Zwift, first and foremost, good luck to you, because I find it boring personally. But you don't need to be sitting on a consistent power output. We're more looking at other variables like RPE, heart rate. Like, power is kind of a byproduct in that type of session. So have the variability, that's fantastic. If you're working on something to do with your cadence, fantastic. Like, we don't have to be in erg mode there necessarily. And yes, if you're like wanting to do some climbing work and work out what's the optimal ratio for me in terms of gear ratio and cadence to be able to power up hills a bit better, how does that suit me? Do I need to spin a bit higher and a lighter resistance? Like, that is all very specific to the road. Absolutely, go out and test that, try that, play with it. You're not going to find those answers in erg mode. It doesn't mean erg mode's bad. And at the same time, it doesn't mean erg modes are superior when we do want to use it. Like, there's no right or wrong here, and that's kind of what Coffee Thoughts is all about anyway. But what I sort of want to get across here is that, like, there seems to be a bit of this excessive polarization of opinion between I love erg mode, I hate erg mode, and like, people just sort of go, nah, you can't be a great cyclist who use erg mode. Like, absolutely you can. There's a time and a place for it. Like there is anything. Like, there is sweet spot training and tempo training and zone 2 and anaerobic based intervals, and there's a time and place for everything. You just got to appropriately use it at that right time and place, and that's really the art of building out a really effective training program and strategy. So again, it's neither here or there whether you want to use it. If you want to use it, great. If you know when to use it and you can time the use of it better, even better. You don't have to use it, but doesn't mean that you shouldn't. Like, it's just a feature at the end of the day, and as long as you understand how it operates. And I think that first discussion point I talked about probably is something that not everyone fully understands of how erg mode actually works and where, I guess, the foundation of the ergometers come from, and what are we actually doing with that mode to start with, and what does it actually mean. I think if more people had an understanding of that and the adaptations that can be induced by using it in specific ways, that's where we can have a bit more probably a bit more use of it and a bit more effective use of it. So hopefully that opens an interesting discussion. I'm really interested to see where people go with this down in the comments. Leave it down below. What do you think of erg mode? Go nuts. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Really rip in here. I think this is an interesting one because I reckon there's so many different opinions. And I think it's a bit of a funny discussion because at the end of the day, it's a little bit irrelevant either way. Like it doesn't change anything. You can still get the same outcomes in terms of adaptations, etc. Just doing it in different methods. It's just like whether you like using it or not. I like it as an effective tool sometimes, as I said, but other times I definitely don't want to use it in some circumstances, as I mentioned too. So crack in the comments down below. I really do want to see where people go with this. Really enjoying doing some of these coffee thoughts videos. Let me know if you've got some ideas that you want to throw around while we make a coffee and chat about it. Again, nothing's right or wrong here. No recommendations for or against. It's just sort of spitting out some thoughts about a topic in the endurance, sports science, performance world that I think is sort of an interesting one to get the conversation started. So I'm going to finish off this coffee. As always, continue to support the channel. Really do appreciate it. And we'll catch you in the next one.